Hi, so in this video we are going to understand a very important topic that is scaling. So in previous video we have already seen that how a single server architecture works and why it is important, and through this series we can see that how a core that is a single server architecture can gradually we can make changes gradually and it can work for millions of users. So let's start with this topic, that is scaling. So in the single server architecture, we have seen that there might be, let's say, there are users that is, let's say we consider that there is only one user, okay, one client, let's say. So this can initiate a request, a client can initiate a request. As we can see, let's get a little bit of recap. So it can initiate the request, first request pass on to the DNS, it returns the IP address, and then it returns the IP address to the client, and client initiate a request, and the request is sent to the server, and based on the request, then a query is hit in the database, right? So I'm not going to explain again in depth, we have already discussed in the previous video. So now we have seen that in a single server architecture we are using only a one single server. Now the thing is ki we need to understand the scaling, and first we need to understand why we need to use scaling. So so let's see that we are using a single server and there might be an issue. Currently, let's say a single server architecture only resolve 100 numbers of requests, 100 users request, and let's say your software gets so popular that a lot of people now are using your software, but as you're using a single server architecture, so it might be possible that a single server can't be won't be able to resolve all the number of requests. Let's say now 500 users or 600 users are using your website, and a single server won't be able to resolve all the requests, and in that case this can be a single point of failure. It means that your single server can be a failure. You might can see that your server get down, so your website won't be able for the users. Now what you can do in this case, you can scale your server. Scale basically means that in that scenario, scaling basically means to in somehow uh, whatever change you might do with your server would be able to resolve all the request by improving performance of the server, by improving by improving the efficiency, by uh, and speed of your server, right, of your machine. So scaling is basically to improve the efficiency and speed of your server, so thus your server or your machine would be able to resolve all the requests that you are getting, right? So how we can do scaling? Scaling depends upon your project. Either you can do vertical scaling or you can do horizontal scaling. Now let's first discuss vertical scaling. So vertical scaling basically means, let's say in single server architecture we are using only one server. So it basically means that upgrading your current server resources, what it means, so it basically means that in single server, currently let's say your server, you are using 8 GB RAM and 4 CPU cores. Now for this resources, your server would be able to resolve, let's say, 500 numbers of requests. Your machine can easily resolve 500 requests. But as your popularity for your let's say software increases, you a lot of request your software can get. So let's say now your server is getting, let's say, 600 to let's say 800 number of requests, now your server won't be able to resolve the request, and your request will take too much time to resolve, right, to get resolved. Now earlier you were using 8 GB RAM and 4 CPU cores. Now what you can do, you can do vertical scaling. Vertical scaling means that increasing the current server resources. This is the server, you are using these resources right now for this number of requests. Now as you are getting more requests, you need to upgrade your server. How you can upgrade? You can upgrade by changing the current server resources. By changing the current server resources, now you are using 8 GB RAM, you can move up to using let's say 12 GB RAM, and instead of using 4 CPU cores, now you are using 8 CPU cores. Now what you did, you just increase the current server up, you did the upgradation. That is what vertical scaling means. Vertical scaling is just increasing the number of resources, increasing the resources of your current server so it can resolve your request easily, जिससे कि it can easily it would be efficient and it will resolve request fastly, right? Now consider, so in that case your focus should be on one single server. There are no lots of single server, your focus should be on one single server, and you can increase the resources of that single server only. That is what vertical scaling is. Scale up, it basically means scale up. You are increasing the current server resources. Okay, now imagine a scenario that you have a land and you want to build a building on that land, right? So what you can do, let's say you want to create, you build a floor, you let's say build 5 floors over that floor. Okay, now let's say you build this building in such a area where there is a so much popularity, everything is available out there, right? So what you did, you started to building more floors on that building. But what happens, you can't just like create 100 or 150 floors in a one single building, right? uh, because as the number of floor increases, the weight increases and your foundation gets weak, right? In that case your building at some point can get destroyed. So same thing might can happen in the vertical scaling. Let's say you have increased currently you have increased the resources. Now your server is able to resolve 600 to 800 number of requests. Now you get more popularity, right? Your software get more popularity, and now the number of requests again increases. Now let's say 1200 to 1500 users are starting using your application, and now still you face the same error. Now your server won't be able to resolve the request, and resolve if it is resolve the request, if it is able to resolve the request, it takes too much time. The request resolution time gets slow, so it can have a bad impact in user experience, right? So user won't be able to won't now he or she don't want to use your website, they might can use other website. So in that case what you can do, again what you can do, you can also like you'll think, okay, let's do vertical scaling, let's again increase the number of resources of this particular server. Now from 12 GB RAM, now you want to increase more RAM, right? Or you want to increase the more CPU cores. But imagine there will be a point that up to which you won't be able to increase the resources. There might be a limitation. In vertical scaling, there is a limitation. As an example, we have seen that you can't just create too much floors in one building. It will be a failure at some point. Similar in vertical scaling, that you can't just increase unlimited number of resources. There will be a limit up to which point you won't be able to increase the resources. Also, moving to switching to 8 GB RAM to 12 GB RAM, it will be it will be costly, right? From 4 CPU cores to 8 CPU cores, it will be costly. Now if you want to again increase the number of resources, it will cost you too much. So there are there are advantages of vertical scaling, that in vertical scaling you can just increase one single server resources and your focus only will be on one single server. But it have some disadvantages, that there will be a limit up to which you won't be able to increase the resources na. And there will be, if you want to increase the resources, it will be too costly. Also, if you are using vertical scaling, in vertical scaling will be only one server, right? And that one server also can be a single point of failure. In As we discussed in single server architecture, there was a one single server, right? You increase the resources, you upgraded the server, still that server can be a single point of failure na. So vertical scaling is better for medium size or small size of projects, where you know that there won't be a too much request, right? So in that case you can use vertical scaling, because in vertical scaling doesn't matter if you increase the resources of that server or machine, still you can have a single point of failure, right? So depending upon your project, if your project is uh, like Google products, so in that case they can't use single server architecture. They can they can't just use vertical scaling, they can't use a single server, because a lots of people use Google all the time, right? Googling something out, so they want to use single server architecture, they can't do just vertical scaling. In that case, what we can do, we can switch to horizontal scaling. Now what horizontal scaling means, now in horizontal scaling, what we can do, horizontal scaling basically means that in that case, in this case, building wala case, what we were discussing, that on on a land, you are creating multiple floors on a one building only. But what else you can do, on that particular land you can create various, on that particular land you can create multiple buildings which can have 10 to 15 floors, 10 to 15 floors. So it is better than this, just having a one building and creating more, increasing the number of floors, which can decrease the foundation, like a foundation can be weak, right? So what we can do, we can horizontally scale. So on that same land we can create different buildings which can have limited number of floors, right? So same architecture or same scaling we can do in horizontal scaling. So in horizontal scaling, consider this again, key that is our clients, and this is the DNS. Request passes on to the DNS return the IP address. Now you are not using a single server architecture, now you are making it much better, you are gradually improving it, improving the performance. So instead of using single server architecture, what we can do, we can use multiple servers. We are horizontally increasing the numbers of servers. In vertical scaling, we were just increasing or upgrading the system, one single server machine resources. But in horizontal scaling, we are using multiple servers. This is server A, server B, server C. Now in horizontal scaling, we can horizontally basically increase the number of servers depending upon your project, how much number of server you can use, there is no limit, it totally depends upon your project, right? Now why it is better, because let's say uh, you switch to horizontal scaling, because let's say 1000 to 1500 people are starting using your software and you get the popularity. So you want that your system should not be slow, your server should not be down, and user experience should be good. In that case, you are using horizontal scaling, so your query should be fast, right? So in this case, what happens, that your request get distributed among the servers. So there won't be a one server which which get overloaded by the request. In single server there is only one server and it can get overloaded by the request, but in horizontal scaling, as you are using multiple numbers of servers, so there might be possibility that one single server won't be get overload, because your load get distributed, and there is no single point of failure, because there is no one single server which can get off and now your website won't be able for the users. In that case it can't be happen, because you are using multiple servers. If your server A gets down, so now your request can pass on to the B server or either C server. So still your website is available for the users if your server still gets down, because you are using multiple server. Your two servers are already working and they are resolving the request. So in that case, if a downtown happens in one single server, your website won't be able, it won't be down, it will be available to the users. Also, as we discussed, there is no single point of failure. There is, we can say, or what you can do, as the number of requests increase, you can add on more servers depending upon the request. But what happens here, if let's say, just a one point that I missed out and I didn't discuss in vertical scaling. So let's say you get a lots of requests and you want to now upgrade your single server. In that case, you first have to shut down your machine. Why? Because you have to increase the resources of this server only. So first you have to shut it down, right? After that you can increase the resources, and because of that your system might get a restart, right? So it takes time. But in this case, if users or the request increases, you don't have to just off your servers, no, off your machine, no. What you can do, you can gradually add more servers depending upon the request, right? Now in horizontal scaling, it is like it resolves this issue. Now in that case, there is a single point of failure, there is no single point of failure, because if one machine gets down, there are more machines that is available to resolve the request, right? And if your one server get overloaded, so the request can pass on to the other servers, and you don't need to shut down your machine and don't need to restart it. You can automatically add more servers to your basically to your architecture, right? But there are some advantages. Like, it is true that if something has advantage, it might have come up with some disadvantages. Basically is key that the architecture get more complex. As you increase the number of servers, your architecture getting more complex, and now you have to handle a lot of let's say if you are using 5 servers or 3 servers, you have to make sure that every server is working on. Now your focus is on one single server, your focus should be on 5 multiple servers. So complexity increase, the architecture get more complex, adding more servers become more complex, right? Also also you need to make consistency amongst the servers, which get a little challenging. So basically we use horizontal scaling when you know that your project is a large scale project. Basically, let's say Google products or Amazon products, right? So huge number of requests your website can get. In that case, you should use horizontal scaling rather than using vertical scaling, because horizontal scaling much better than vertical scaling. I hope you understood the point. I hope you understood the point that why we need scaling, and we can scale our software depending upon our needs, our depending on our software. So either we can do vertical scaling or we can do the horizontal scaling, but I prefer to use horizontal scaling when you know your website can get too much request. But for a small project or a medium sized project, you should use vertical scaling, because horizontal scaling is also too costly, because you are using you are using multiple servers, and this machine will run 24 by 7 if it is running 24 by 7, right? So there will be a electricity consumption, so you might get bill. So in that case you should be aware what type, not huge amount, depending upon, so depends upon your project, your choice, whatever scaling you want to use, either horizontal or vertical. I hope you understood this point. Thank you. Tata. Bye bye.